What is a dominant allele? A dominant allele is an allele that masks the effect of the other allele in a heterozygote, that is, an individual having two different alleles, and the dominant allele is represented or written as a capitalized letter. The allele whose effect is masked is said to be recessive and is written in the same letter but in lower case. Dominance is not a fixed property of the allele and depends on the other allele it is compared to. Just like taller is a relative term, you would be unable to answer me if I asked you, are you taller? But you would be able to answer me if I asked, are you taller than me? So when talking about dominance of an allele, for example, blood type allele A, it has to be compared to another allele. So it is said that allele A is dominant to allele O, since in the heterozygotes, only the effect of allele A is observed, as allele A produces proteins but allele O does not. And allele A is co-dominant to allele B, as both express proteins in the heterozygotes. A dominant allele may be beneficial, harmful, or neutral, as seen in the following examples. The beneficial allele, which regulates the flow of fluids and salts, is dominant to the allele causing cystic fibrosis, which cannot control fluid and causes damage to the lungs and other organs. The harmful allele causing Huntington's disorder is dominant to the allele producing the protein required for the normal function of nerve cells. And while brown eyes are dominant to blue eyes, neither brown nor blue eyes produce any discernible benefit or harm. Dominant inheritance was discovered by Gregor Mendel, the father of genetics. In Mendel's experiments, he repeatedly crossed true breeding pea plants with different traits for a character, like plants producing green seeds and plants producing yellow seeds. True breeding means they would produce offspring identical to themselves if allowed to self-pollinate. Mendel found that the hybrid offspring in the F1 generation always showed one of the traits, for example, yellow seeds. When Mendel crossed the F1 amongst themselves, offspring in the next or F2 generation showed a ratio of 3 plants producing yellow seeds to 1 plant producing green seeds. Thus, Mendel concluded that 2 alleles were present in the F1, since the green trait reappeared in the F2. But the effect of one allele was masked by the other in the heterozygotes. A dominant allele is an allele that masks the effect of the other allele in a heterozygote. Of course, in humans, we would not be allowed to carry out control matings, but we could look at pedigree data to determine if a trait was dominant. Pedigree data is information on the occurrence of a phenotype in family members. A dominant inheritance pattern for the autosomal gene, that is a gene present on a non-sex chromosome, would be inferred if inheritance of the trait does not skip generations, affected offspring have an affected parent, unaffected parents do not transmit the trait, traits appear in both sexes with equal frequency. An X-linked dominant inheritance is inferred if the trait's appearance does not skip generations, affected sons have an affected mother, affected daughters have either an affected mother or an affected father, affected fathers pass the trait on to all their daughters, and often more females than males are affected. Dominance has no bearing on whether or not a trait is common. The frequency of a particular allele in a population depends on the introduction of that allele into the population either as a result of mutation or migration, whether individuals having the allele survive, and how many children they pass on the alleles to in following generations. In summary, a dominant allele is an allele that masks the effect of the other allele in a heterozygote. Dominance is not a fixed property of the allele and depends on the other allele it is compared to. Whether or not an allele is dominant to another may be discovered by control matings or using pedigree information. A dominant allele may be beneficial, harmful, or neutral. Dominance has no bearing on whether or not a trait is common. So let's check our understanding of dominance. Question 1. When the genotype consists of a dominant and a recessive allele, the phenotype would be like which allele? A, the dominant, B, the recessive, C, neither. The answer is A, as dominant alleles mask the effect of recessive alleles. Question 2. There are two variants for thorn length in the plant population, short thorns and long thorns. Long thorns help protect the plant from being eaten by animals. Given this information, which statement indicates what you would infer about how short thorns are inherited? A. It is a dominant inheritance pattern because short thorns have an adaptive advantage. B. It is a recessive inheritance pattern because short thorns are more widespread in the population. C. It is a codominant inheritance pattern because long and short thorns are found in the population. D. It is impossible to determine. The answer is D, as how an allele is inherited can be inferred from the inheritance pattern from control matings or pedigree data. A is not the answer, as dominant genes are not necessarily advantageous. B is not the answer, as allele dominance has no impact on its frequency. C is not the answer, as codominance is when the heterozygous expresses both traits. Question 3. Since 6 fingers are dominant over 5 fingers, why don't most people have 6 fingers? A. There is no survival or reproductive advantage to having 6 fingers. B. Having 6 fingers is caused by a mutation and mutations are always bad. C. In the future, most people will have 6 fingers and dominant genes will always take over in a population. A is the best answer. A trait typically becomes more common if there is some survival or reproductive advantage to organisms with a trait. Question 4. Dominance is A. An allele that masks the effect of another allele. B. A gene that masks the effect of another gene. C. Both A and B are correct. D. Neither A nor B is correct. The answer is A. B is not the answer, as different genes are not the same as different alleles. Do watch the video on genes and alleles. The link is provided in the description. B describes epistasis, for which there will be a video coming up soon. Thank you for watching.